Isn't it a great day to be a Christian? Open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. We live in a world of progress and innovation and education, and yet we still see foolishness everywhere we look, in politics, in families, on social media, sometimes even in the churches. And this is not a new phenomenon. Remember, way back in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, Solomon said, the thing that has been is that which shall be, that which is done is that which shall be done, and there's no new thing under the sun. This has been going on for a long time, and there's still foolishness going around. In our lesson this evening, Solomon, who's the wisest man that ever lived, is going to give us some lessons about foolishness and about how that can ruin wisdom. So let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 10. 4 different lessons that we're going to look at tonight. First of all, the subtle power of foolishness. We don't think of foolishness being powerful, but it is. There's some power there. We're going to talk about wisdom as it pertains to leadership. We're going to talk about the dangers of foolish speech. And finally, the value of working wisely. So let's go through each of these topics and see if we can live wisely, even though we're living in a world where a lot of folks are living foolishly. So let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 10, and we'll begin in verse 1, and we'll talk about the power of foolishness. Ecclesiastes 10:1 says, dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor, so doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. Solomon says, people that seem to be wise and honorable, a little foolishness can make them stink like flies make perfume stink. How many dead flies would have to be in a bowl of soup before you decided it was time to throw it out? Just a little bit of some things can ruin something that's really good. That's what Solomon says foolishness can do for people that are wise and have good reputation. Everything is going good, and then they kind of get foolish. And just like flies can make perfume stink, a little foolishness can stink up good people. How many of you know somebody that's messed up basically their entire life by one dishonest decision or by one outburst? A lot of times friendships are ruined over one tweet or one Facebook post where everybody gets all bent out of shape because you don't think before you say something. It doesn't take much to mess up big things. Decisions matter. Look at verse 2. It says, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. That's a poetic picture, but it's showing that the wise person is guided by what's right, what's just, and what's good. A fool goes the opposite direction. He goes off the other way. He's led by selfishness and pride and impulses. Look at verse 3. It says, yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. Foolishness shows up, not just in big moments, but in the little things. Little events can show people. Everyday life, how you walk, how you talk, how you make decisions can make you appear foolish. Let's look at a practical example. Let's say it's getting close to the end of the month and you got too much month left at the end of your money. And you look in the pantry, you look in your refrigerator, and there's not much there. And you don't have a whole lot of money, and you decide, okay, I got to make some wise decisions here. So you go through, you check all your grocery items, you find out exactly what you want. Then you think of some recipes that use that, and you go to the store and you're very careful. You get just exactly what you need to make what you've got last, and everything's going to be good. If I cook this and I cook that, everything's going to be all right. You put the right items in your basket. You walk up to the checkout counter, and right before you get there, they got this counter with all the candy and the gum and the as seen on TV items that you've seen advertised, and all of a sudden you've blown the budget because you get a bunch of stuff that you don't need. Shopping wisely was one thing, and then you go to what they call the impulse items. They call them that because they put them there so people will buy them on impulse, just on a whim. That's what Solomon says we need to avoid. The same thing happens in life. God has a plan for us. He's told us exactly what we need to have in our life, and then we're going along and everything's going good. We've got our life going right, and then we look over here and we see something that we don't really need, but we give in to impulses. We give in to lust, we give in to foolishness, and we mess up God's plan for our life. We blow the budget on things that we don't really need. Wisdom in this knowledge is character in action. The wise person can avoid looking off to the left and the right. They can focus on the goal. Wise people keep their eyes on Jesus. Beginning in verse 4, Solomon starts talking about wisdom and leadership. And he says that foolishness in leaders can affect everyone beneath them. Ecclesiastes 10 verse 4 said, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. Basically, stay calm when authorities rage. Notice a lot of that on TV lately. The people that are in elected office are supposed to be authorities, supposed to be in high places. For some reason, think it's really good to be shouting profanity now. There's a whole lot of that on TV. They're raging, they're carrying on their storm. I'm mad, and they're cussing and fussing and carrying on a bunch of stuff. Solomon says, just be calm. Keep your place. Don't let that affect you. You shouldn't return that in kind. Maybe you've had a boss that said something to you he shouldn't say. You have a boss that gets mad and calls your name or says something bad to you, and maybe you got mad and quit right then. Or maybe even worse, you said something that you shouldn't have said back to him and got fired. It's messed up because somebody that was in a high place weren't wise. And they didn't act wisely, and people reacted both ways, in the wrong way. Solomon says sometimes the spirit of the ruler is going to rise up against thee. The person in charge is going to mess up. He's going to cause me problems, but he's saying that we need to not leave our place. We need to hold firm. We need to not let that affect how we live. Verse 5, he says, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. People in leadership positions may not be right. In fact, we've seen quite frequently in the last few years that people in leadership positions are not right. They're doing things they shouldn't do. They're passing bills they shouldn't pass. They're making laws they shouldn't make. And some of that happens, and it is counter to God's law. We need to reject it. But if it's not, even though people are making foolish decisions, we need to just keep doing what's right and do what God wants us to do. Remember at the end of verse 4, he said, yielding pacifieth great offenses. A lot of times saying something back is just going to make it worse. Now, he doesn't say go into things, especially if it's sinful. We shouldn't participate in anything that's sinful. We should stand up for what's right. We need to know when to say what. That's wisdom. I think we can make a difference. My daddy always said there are two things to worry about, things you can change, things you can't change. He said things you can't change, there's no use to worry about them because you can't change it. Things you can change, there's no use to worry about it. Get busy and change it. We need to be wise, know what we can change, what we can't change, and then hold our place. We need to stay steady when other people are angry. Now sometimes the wrong people get in charge. Look at verse 6. It says, folly is set in great dignity, and the rich set in low place. I've seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. Sometimes fools rule, and that's not good. Solomon said that happens. Apparently it happened thousands of years ago. I thought we're the only ones that elected people that shouldn't be in position. But apparently everybody understands that happens somewhere. A wise person realizes that God sees all. God's going to be found right in the end. We need to just do what he wants us to do. We're going to skip around just a little bit for the rest of the lesson. Some of the later verses go well with this point. So we're talking about wisdom and leadership. Go down to verse 16. Verse 16 says, woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child, and thy princes eat in the morning. And when thy king is a child doesn't necessarily mean that he's young in years. It means he's not mature, or she's not mature. She's inexperienced. She has poor leadership. They make childish decisions. Solomon says, woe, when you got somebody in leadership that acts like that. And when thy princes eat in the morning, eating here is a metaphor for having a party. They're out partying in the morning when everybody else is working, when they should be trying to do what's best for the people they're ruling. Instead, they're having a feast. They're taking care of their own desires instead of working on doing what's best for their people. These leaders are partying when they should be working, When we have immature, self-indulgent leaders, Solomon says, woe to you. Leaders should have wisdom. Look at verse 17. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. So that's the opposite. Woe when your leaders are childish. Blessed are you when you've got leaders in noble position. He's not talking about being noble birth. He's talking about noble character, about being well trained, about being the people they're supposed to be. He said people that are led by leaders like that will be blessed. You're blessed when your leaders eat in due season and for strength. They have their party when it's time to party, not when it's time to work. And they eat not so they can just feed their lust. They eat to gain strength for their labors. We need to pray for those in authority. We need to pray to have people that are wise in positions of authority. So we're going to skip around a bit. We'll get back up to verse 8 in just a little bit. But now let's go to verse 11, and we'll start the next point. Point 3 is talking about the dangers of foolish speech. Solomon gives us warnings about how fools speak. First of all, verse 11, he talks about timing. Ecclesiastes 10:11 says, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. Now, it took me a while to figure out this serpent and enchantment. But think about it. You've seen the old movies where the guy would be playing the little flute or whatever, and the snake would come up out of the basket, and he would sway back and forth and charm the snake. That's what he's talking about. The snake charmer would use music or chants to control the snake, but he compares the tongue to a snake that's not being charmed. It's just going on its own. It's not being controlled by anything else. The proper action is not being taken. The proper timing is not being exhibited. And that tongue just jumps out there and bites somebody. And that happens. And he says a babbler is no better. The babbler here is talking about somebody that just babbles on. They're a foolish talker. They speak carelessly. They speak constantly. And Solomon says they're speaking foolishly. It's like a snake that's out of control. Somebody's tongue can hurt people, can cause problems. We need to make sure that we don't have any uncharmed serpents in our mouth. He continues talking about the tongue in verse 12. He says, the words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. In other words, you're going to get done in by your mouth. You say the wrong thing, it's going to do you in. Gracious implies kindness and favor and restraint. A wise person speaks with his words seasoned with grace. Fools babble, and he says the lips will swallow themselves up. They get messed up in their own words. Look at verse 13. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. It said the fool starts off talking nonsense, and it goes downhill from there. He starts out with foolishness, and he ends with mischievous madness. That sounds like it's hurting somebody. It might hurt the person doing the speaking. It might hurt other people by his words. We need to control our tongue. Verse 14. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be after him. Who can tell him? You ever heard somebody say, well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Solomon says they can't tell you what's going to happen because they don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know that the sun's going to come up tomorrow. The Lord may come back tonight. We can't be saying, well, here's what's going to happen. I said a fool will do that. People can't tell what's going to be. What shall be after him? We don't know what's going to come tomorrow. And that last line, who can tell him? That highlights the arrogance of a fool, because you can't tell a fool anything, because they won't listen, because they don't care. They think they have all the answers. Skip down to verse 20. That's still talking about wisdom in speech. Verse 20 says, curse not the king, no, not in thy thought. Curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. Okay, the word curse here means to speak disdainfully, to talk bad about. It doesn't just mean don't utter profanity. It means don't badmouth the people in authority. Why? Because the bird of the air shall carry thy voice. In other words, a little bird told me that you said this about me. A lot of times things we say in private don't stay private. Said even in your bedchamber, be careful who you tell things because you don't know that they're not going to spread that. And it's not going to be told to somebody else. Solomon says, don't talk bad about people in power because it might get back to them. He said, even your thoughts. How can my thoughts get back to people? Well, sometimes my face betrays my thoughts. Sometimes my actions betray my thoughts. I don't need to think bad things about people because sometimes they can tell I'm thinking badly about them. This is the way I act. So I need to think positive thoughts. I need to say positive words. Okay, now let's go back up to verse 8 and we'll look at our final point, the value of wise work. Starting in verse 8, Solomon talks about using practical proverbs to teach us the wisdom of hard work. First of all, he shows us that all work's not created equal. Verse 8 says, he that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh a hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Digging is hard work. But sometimes you're digging a pit that you're going to fall into. Sometimes people get caught in their own traps. They dig a hole for somebody else, and they're the ones that get caught up in it. And whoso breaketh a hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Hedges back then were used for fences. They'd put rocks together, or they let bushes grow up to keep people from going back and forth where they shouldn't go. You break down that hedge, something that's in there might get out. That a serpent might bite him. Maybe that hedge was there to keep the serpents in. And you're breaking it down. You don't know what is going to be behind what you're destroying. So we need to make sure our work is not breaking something down, not tearing something apart. Verse 9 says, whoso remove a stone shall be hurt therewith. He that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. Even if you're doing things that are okay. Sometimes you get hurt working hard, doing good things. Be careful when you're lifting stones. Be careful when you're chopping wood. A lot of bad things can happen. Those are images of physical labor. We need to be careful. Even honest work involves some risk sometimes. The implication is don't act carelessly. Don't act carelessly in what you do either, or in how you do it. Verse 10 says, if the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength, but wisdom is profitable to direct. And that's real fancy talking to saying if your axe is dull, you better sharpen it before you start chopping wood. If the edge is dull, it takes a lot more strokes. You have to hit it a lot harder and more frequently to chop down a tree if you have a dull axe. It said first you whet the edge, first you sharpen the axe. He's talking about the wisdom of preparation. We need to think about what we're doing. We need to prepare. We need to get ready. Working wisely is like sharpening an axe. It makes the work easier. One more verse about working wisely. Verse 15 says, the labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. You ever see somebody that works really, really hard, but they don't really know what they're doing? I mean, there's an easier way to do some jobs. Maybe you're supposed to move a bunch of rocks from one place to another. It's harder to take one rock at a time than it would be to load up a wheelbarrow or a wagon or something, but it wears them out because they don't think about how an easier way to do it. Sometimes watching other people work or being involved with other people's work that are doing it foolishly just wears everybody out. I get tired watching other people do things sometimes. And that's what he says, it wearieth every one of them, because they're not doing anything of value, because they're not using wisdom. Like this last line, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. When I read that, I thought about an old Cal Smith song. I don't know if you know who Cal Smith was. Back in the 70s, he had a song out called Hello Country Bumpkin. And one of the lines is, this woman looked at the man and she wondered how on earth that country bumpkin ever found his way to town. Okay? That's what Solomon is saying. Fool doesn't know how to get to town. He doesn't know how to find his way to the city. But in Solomon's time, the city was the center of commerce and wisdom and culture, and all the good things were found in the city. He said fools don't know where to look. They don't know where to go to get the things that they need. They don't know where the solutions are. They don't know where the resources are. He doesn't know how to accomplish even the most basic tasks. Maybe he lacks common sense, or maybe he lacks direction, but figuratively or literally, a fool has trouble getting the help he needs. Solomon says you need to make sure that you look for what you need in the right places. Now, if you're keeping score, there are two verses we haven't covered yet. That's verses 18 and 19. Let's look at verse 18, and this is still talking about work, but in verse 18 it says that laziness is destructive. Verse 18 says, by much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. You ever see a house that's a really nice little house and people move out of it and it just starts falling apart? Things happen, there's nobody there to fix it. Without regular maintenance, the roof sags and leaks start. Maybe the floor starts giving way in different places. Things just fall apart if they're not taken care of. That's a practical truth for physical things. It's also true in our lives, in our personal lives. Laziness leads to disorder. We don't accomplish the things we need to accomplish. We have physical problems. We miss opportunities. People have nervous breakdowns because they just keep putting things off until it's too late. But it's true in our spiritual life. We have people that are lazy spiritually. They don't pray enough. They don't read enough. They don't study enough. They don't spend enough time with brothers and sisters, and they morally decay because they don't have the discipline. They're just too lazy to do what they know they need to be doing spiritually. Verse 19 says, "A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things." Save that verse for last because this is the one I had the most trouble figuring out. And I'm still not sure that I figured it out. But he's been talking about work. He's been talking about foolish conduct. And then he says, "A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, and money solves everything." And that doesn't sound like what you really read in the Bible a lot. But maybe he's using satire. Maybe he's saying that's not true. I mean, the attitude of rich, powerful people is eat, drink, and be merry, and that more money can solve all my problems. But maybe this is a message about misusing God's blessing. Food is good, but partying to the excess is bad. Drinking is good. Drink a little wine for your stomach's sake, some situations, but drunkenness is always condemned. And sometimes, if you don't watch out, one drink, you're one drink drunk. So we need to avoid temptation. We need to work hard because money is necessary, but money is not the answer to all our problems. In fact, the love of money is the root of all evil. Resources have purposes. Wisdom gives us the power to keep everything in its proper place, to understand what those purposes are. Ecclesiastes 10:19 reflects a worldly viewpoint. People throw feasts for fun. They drink for feel good. And they believe money can solve everything. Solomon is not endorsing those things. He's talking about the vanity of life and the emptiness that can result if we have that kind of attitude. Ecclesiastes 10 contains practical advice and some conflicting truths, but it tells us that a little foolishness can undo a lot of wisdom. Leadership and influence have great responsibility. Words can build up or destroy, and laziness can ruin things, but wisdom can restore them. The good news is we don't have to do this alone. God will provide the wisdom. James 1:5 says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." You ever think about that? God said you pray for it, and he'll give you wisdom. You pray for it, you're already exhibiting wisdom. You've started already. When you realize where the source of wisdom is, it's from God. God doesn't just give information, he gives transformation. You seek answers from God, he'll tell you you need to be a Christian. It's the only life worth living, the only death one would dare to die. If you're already a Christian, are you remembering to ask God regularly to give you wisdom, to help you in times of trouble, to lead you through the problems in life? Are you depending on him? Are you letting him be in control? Are you following him? Are you seeking to do the right? If you're not, if you'd like to make a change, you can do it tonight. Won't you come right now and stand together as we sing.